The twin suns of Alari blazed mercilessly overhead, their combined heat turning the endless expanse of crimson sand into a shimmering furnace. Nera stumbled across the dunes, her azure skin gleaming with perspiration, her ceremonial robes torn and stained from 3 days of desperate wandering. The ancestral staff in her right hand pulsed with a faint, spiritual energy, its crystalline head catching and refracting the harsh light into prismatic patterns. She had lost everything. Her foster mother slain before her eyes, her people's sacred temple reduced to rubble. The transport gate that had brought her here now, nothing but twisted metal and broken dreams. The Krivak had come without warning, as they always did, their 6-limbed forms moving with terrifying coordination as they swept through the colonies like a plague of destruction. Nera pressed a trembling hand to her lips, tasting the metallic tang of blood and sand. The staff in her hand grew warmer, responding to her emotional turmoil. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "The staff of our ancestors is more than a weapon, child. It is a bridge between what was and what will be. In your darkest hour, it will guide you to hope." Hope. The word felt foreign now, like a language she had once spoken, but could no longer understand. The first sign of the approaching sandstorm was a low rumble, barely audible above the whisper of wind across the dunes. Nera looked up to see a wall of darkness rising on the horizon, blotting out the sky like the hand of an angry god. The storm moved with supernatural speed, swallowing the landscape in its path. Panic clawed at her throat. She had survived the Krivak assault, the collapse of the transport gate 3 days, without proper food or water. But this storm would kill her, with the same indifference that the desert showed to all who dared challenge its vastness. She ran. Her feet slipped and slid in the loose sand each step, a small avalanche that threatened to send her tumbling. The staff helped her maintain balance, its energy seeming to anticipate her movements. Behind her, the storm's roar grew louder, a sound like 1,000 hungry beasts. As the first winds hit her, driving sand like needles against her exposed skin, Nera spotted something impossible, a shadow where no shadow should be. A rocky outcropping partially buried by centuries of shifting sand. And there, barely visible in the growing darkness, a narrow crevice between the stones. She threw herself toward the opening, diving into the crack, just as the full fury of the storm unleashed itself upon the desert. The world became a howling nightmare of sand and wind, but she was safe, mostly. The crevice was deeper than she had expected, widening into a narrow tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. As her eyes adjusted, she noticed something that made her heart skip. There, carved into the stone wall, was a symbol she didn't recognize. Not Alari, not any of the known alien scripts in the database. But beside it, etched with obvious care, was a small marker that glowed with a soft, steady light. Artificial light, which meant technology, which meant someone, or something, was still here. Nera gripped her staff tighter, feeling its spiritual energy resonate with something deeper in the tunnel. Against all logic, against 3,000 years of accepted history, that light looked remarkably human. The tunnel wound deeper into the rock, its walls showing signs of deliberate excavation. Ancient tool marks scored the stone, and here and there she glimpsed more of those strange symbols, accompanied by that soft, persistent glow. The air grew cooler as she descended, and she caught the faint hum of machinery, ventilation systems perhaps, or power generators. Her staff pulsed brighter with each step, its crystalline head now shining like a beacon. The ancestral spirits were trying to tell her something, to guide her toward some destiny she couldn't yet understand. The tunnel opened into a wider corridor, and Nera gasped. The walls were lined with panels of some unknown metal, their surfaces covered in flowing script that seemed to shift and change as she watched. Environmental controls hummed softly, maintaining a comfortable temperature and atmosphere. But most shocking of all were the alcoves carved into the walls, each containing artifacts that were unmistakably of human origin. A photograph carefully preserved under transparent material, showing 2 humans, a man and a woman, standing before what looked like a massive construction project. A child's toy worn with age, but still recognizable as a stuffed animal from Earth's history. A book, its pages yellow with age, written in what appeared to be ancient English. Nera reached out with trembling fingers to touch the glass protecting the photograph, and a voice behind her made her spin around in terror. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you. The preservation field is pretty sensitive to foreign contact." The man who stepped out of the shadows was undeniably human. Tall, lean with short brown hair, and intelligent green eyes. He wore a jumpsuit of some advanced material that seemed to regulate his body temperature. He moved with the careful precision of someone who had lived alone for a very long time, and his hand rested casually on what was obviously a weapon. Nera raised her staff defensively, its spiritual energy crackling around the crystalline head like captured lightning. The man's eyes widened as he took in her appearance. Her azure skin, her ceremonial robes, the obvious alien nature of her physiology. "Alari," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. "You're Alari. But how did you find this place? The Krivak destroyed your homeworld months ago." "Not my homeworld," Nera said, her voice hoarse from days in the desert. "A colony. And you're human. But humans are extinct. Everyone knows that." The man laughed, a sound tinged with bitterness. "Extinct. Right. That's what we wanted everyone to think." He extended his hand in a gesture of peace. "My name is Daniel Marcus, pilot and engineer of Outpost 7. And you, I'm guessing, are the first non-human to set foot in this place for about 3,000 years. Daniel led her deeper into the complex, and Nera's amazement grew with each step. The outpost was vast, a network of chambers and corridors carved into the living rock and reinforced with advanced technology. Hydroponic gardens provided fresh food, fusion reactors hummed with barely contained power, and room after room contained databases, workshops, and equipment that spoke of a civilization that had not merely survived, but thrived in hidden isolation. "We call it the Long Concealment," Daniel explained, as they walked through what appeared to be a central command center. Holographic displays showed star charts, data streams, and what looked like surveillance feeds from across the galaxy. After the Krivak first appeared, after they started their campaign of systematic extermination, humanity made a choice. We couldn't fight them, not directly. They were too strong, too organized, too ruthless. So we vanished. He activated a display, showing the construction of hidden outposts, the careful erasure of human presence from known space, the elaborate deception that had convinced the galaxy that humanity had been completely wiped out. "We've been watching, learning, preparing. Every species the Krivak destroyed we studied. Every tactical pattern, every weakness, every little advantage we could find." Nera sank into a chair, her staff across her knees, trying to process this revelation. 3,000 years? You've been hiding for 3,000 years? My ancestors did. I was born here, raised here. For 67 years, I've been alone in this outpost, maintaining the equipment, monitoring the data streams, waiting for the day when humanity would emerge from the shadows and take the fight back to the Krivak. He looked at her, with eyes that held both hope and desperate loneliness. "I never expected that day to begin with an Alari warrior falling through our front door." Before Nera could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Daniel rushed to the command console, his fingers flying over the controls as data flooded the screens. His face went pale. "They've found us," he whispered. "The Krivak. A scout fleet, 3 ships dropping out of hyperspace." He turned to Nera, his expression grim. "They must have tracked you here." Nera felt ice form in her stomach. "I led them to you. I'm sorry, I didn't know." "It's not your fault," Daniel said firmly. "But we have a choice to make. We can try to hide, hope they don't detect the outpost, or we activate the full defensive protocols, fight them. But if we do, that the secret is out. 3,000 years of concealment ended." Nera stood raising her staff, feeling its power respond to her determination. "Then we fight. I've lost everything to the Krivak already. I won't lose anything else. Daniel nodded, a grim smile playing at his lips. All right then. Let's show these bastards what humanity learned while they thought we were dead. The next few hours were a blur of preparation and anticipation. Daniel activated defensive systems that had lain dormant for centuries, raising energy shields around the outpost and powering up weapon emplacements that emerged from hidden chambers in the rock. Nera watched in fascination as human technology advanced beyond anything she had imagined came online with ruthless efficiency. The Krivak will send scouts first, Daniel explained, as they monitored the approaching ships. They'll want to confirm what they're finding before committing to a full assault. That gives us an advantage. We know this terrain and we know their tactics. He handed her a compact device that looked like a communication unit. This is keyed to the outpost systems. If something happens to me, you can activate the self-destruct from anywhere in the complex. Don't let them capture this technology. Nera nodded, clipping the device to her belt. What about afterwards if we survive this? There's a ship, Daniel said. A one-man fighter called the Pathfinder. Fast, stealthy, equipped with everything we need to reach New Terra, the hidden human capital. If we can get there, warn them that the secret is out. They didn't have time to plan further. The first Krivak landing craft touched down near the outpost entrance, and suddenly, the war that had waited 3 millennia was upon them. The Krivak scouts were everything the stories had said. They were tall, insectoid beings with 6 arms, each ending in hands capable of wielding multiple weapons simultaneously. Their exoskeletons gleamed like black metal, and their compound eyes missed nothing as they moved through the rocky terrain with predatory grace. Nera and Daniel waited in the maintenance corridors that honeycombed the outpost, using the complex's sensor systems to track the intruders. The first group of 3 scouts entered through the main tunnel, their weapons scanning the strange human artifacts with obvious confusion. Now, Daniel whispered. Nera stepped into the corridor behind them, her staff blazing with spiritual energy. The lead Krivak spun toward her, all 6 arms moving to bring weapons to bear, but the staff's power was already reaching out, flooding the creature's nervous system with disorienting impulses. The alien stumbled its compound eyes, dilating as its sensory input became a chaos of false signals. Daniel emerged from the opposite direction, a weapon that fired concentrated energy beams, taking down the second scout before it could react. The third Krivak, seeing its companions fall, triggered some kind of alarm device before Daniel's second shot silenced it permanently. They know we're here now, Daniel said, checking the bodies. And they'll be very interested in that staff of yours. I've never seen anything affect Krivak's sensory systems like that. Ancestral power, Nera said simply. My grandmother said the staff could bridge the gap between mind and matter, between what is and what ought to be. I never really understood until now. More alarms echoed through the outpost. The Krivak were coming in force now, landing parties deploying around the perimeter, while their ships moved into orbital bombardment positions. Daniel led Nera through a maze of service tunnels toward the launch bay, where the Pathfinder waited. The self-destruct will give us maybe 10 minutes of cover, he said as they ran. The explosion will look like a reactor overload, maybe buy us some confusion in their sensor readings. They reached the launch bay, just as the first orbital bombardment struck the outpost. The entire structure shook, lights flickering, as power systems strained to maintain the shields. The Pathfinder sat in its launch cradle, a sleek craft that somehow managed to look both human and utterly alien. 3,000 years of isolated development had given humanity's technology a unique aesthetic. Get aboard, Daniel said, running through the pre-flight sequence with practice speed. I'll have us launched in 30 seconds. But the Krivak had other plans. A team of warriors burst into the launch bay, their weapons already firing. Energy bolts scorched the air around them, as Daniel dove for cover behind a control console. Nera stood her ground, her staff's power expanding outward in waves of disruptive force. The lead Krivak staggered, as its sensory systems overloaded, but the others pressed forward, their weapons tracking toward Daniel's position. Nera channeled more power through the staff, feeling the ancestral spirits surrounding her, guiding her actions. The crystalline head blazed like a star, and suddenly every electronic device in the bay began malfunctioning. The Krivak weapons sparked and died. Emergency lights strobed wildly, and in the chaos, Daniel completed the launch sequence. "Get in!" he shouted over the growing roar of the Pathfinder's engines. Nera ran for the ship the Krivak, pursuing her on foot, now that their weapons were useless. She reached the hatch just as Daniel triggered the self-destruct countdown. 10 minutes until Outpost 7 became a crater in the desert. The Pathfinder lifted off with tremendous acceleration, Daniel's hands steady on the controls as he navigated through the chaos of the orbital battle above. The Krivak ships, expecting only a simple mop-up operation, were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of an unknown vessel, erupting from what they had thought was a primitive archaeological site. "Hold on," Daniel warned, pushing the ship into a steep climb toward the edge of the atmosphere. "This is going to get interesting." One of the Krivak ships moved to intercept them, its weapons locking onto the Pathfinder's heat signature. Daniel threw the ship into a series of evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible without the artificial gravity generators built into human technology. They danced through space like a leaf in a hurricane, dodging energy blasts that lit up the darkness around them. Behind them, Outpost 7 erupted in a brilliant flash of light. The explosion was visible even from orbit, a mushroom cloud of vaporized rock and metal that would be seen for hundreds of kilometers. The Krivak ships pulled back sensors, struggling to analyze what had just happened. In that moment of confusion, Daniel engaged the Pathfinder's stealth systems. Advanced metamaterials wrapped the ship in a cloak of electromagnetic deception, making it effectively invisible to most forms of detection. They slipped away into the void, like shadows fleeing the dawn. For the first time in days, Nera felt safe enough to truly breathe. She looked around the ship's interior, marveling at the blend of familiar and alien technology. The controls were clearly designed for human hands, but there were systems here that seemed to incorporate principles she had never seen before. "Impressive ship," she said as Daniel set course for the hyperspace jump point. "She's been my home for most of my life," Daniel replied. "Built her myself, based on designs from the archives. Took me 20 years to complete." They settled into the routine of hyperspace travel, the stars stretching into lines outside the viewports, as the ship tucked itself into an alternate dimension, where faster-than-light travel was possible. With immediate danger behind them, they finally had time to talk, to learn about each other. Nera told Daniel about her life on the Alari colony, about the temple where she had trained in the spiritual arts, about her foster mother, who had sacrificed herself to give Nera time to escape through the transport gate. She explained how the ancestral staff worked, how it connected her to the accumulated wisdom and power of her people's greatest leaders. Daniel shared the story of the long concealment, how his ancestors had chosen survival over honor, how they had watched the Krivak systematically destroy species after species while humans remained hidden in their scattered outposts. He showed her star charts marking the locations of other human refugees, each one a beacon of hope in a galaxy that thought their species extinct. As they traveled, something unexpected began to grow between them. It started as mutual respect born from their shared fight against the Krivak. It deepened as they shared their stories, their losses, their hopes for the future. Despite their different species, despite the vast differences in their cultures, they found common ground in their determination to protect those they cared about. "There's something I want to show you," Daniel said one day, as they approached the new Terra system. He activated a holographic display that showed star charts overlaid with historical data. "We've been tracking Krivak movements for 3 millennia, building a comprehensive database of their tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. But there's one thing we've never understood." The display showed a series of archaeological sites scattered across the galaxy, each one associated with ancient civilizations that predated the Krivak by thousands of years. These sites all show evidence of the same technology, the same architectural principles, We think they represent an ancient alliance of species that once opposed the Krivak. Nera's staff began to pulse with energy, responding to something in the display. "The Harmony Spear," she whispered. "What?" "Something my grandmother mentioned in the old stories. A weapon created by the First Alliance to bring peace to the galaxy. Most scholars thought it was just mythology, but—" She held up the staff, watching as its light reflected off the holographic display. What if it wasn't? Daniel stared at the display with growing excitement. If such a weapon existed, if we could find it, we could end this war, Nera finished. Not just drive back the Krivak, but actually stop them permanently. They emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the new Terra system to find chaos waiting for them. A massive Krivak fleet hung in space around the hidden human capital, hundreds of ships arranged in attack formation. Human defense platforms and ships engaged them in desperate battle, but they were heavily outnumbered. "How did they find us?" Daniel whispered, his face pale, as he watched Tracer fire light up the darkness between worlds. "They must have tracked us," Nera said. "Or maybe they found evidence at the outpost before it destroyed itself." Daniel was already plotting an intercept course, pushing the Pathfinder's engines to maximum. "We have to get to the surface, warn them about the weapon. If the Harmony Spear really exists." They plunged into the battle zone, the Pathfinder's stealth systems straining to keep them hidden among the chaos of combat. Energy blasts lit up space around them as human and Krivak forces clashed in the largest space battle in 3,000 years. Daniel's piloting skills were the only thing keeping them alive as they wove between capital ships and fighters dodging crossfire from both sides. They broke through the orbital defenses and dove toward New Terra's surface, the Pathfinder's hull glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction. Below them spread a world transformed by millennia of human engineering cities that seemed to grow organically from the landscape forests that had been coaxed back to life after some ancient cataclysm. The capital city was built into a series of connected mountain peaks, each one crowned with gleaming towers that reached toward the sky. Defense installations fired streams of energy upward, trying to hold back the Krivak assault, but Nera could see that the shields were failing. They might have hours before the city fell. Daniel brought the Pathfinder down in a landing bay, carved into the side of one of the peaks. As they disembarked, they were met by a squad of human soldiers in powered armor, their weapons trained on the ship until they recognized Daniel. "Dr. Marcus," one of them exclaimed, raising his visor to reveal a young face marked by exhaustion and stress. "Thank the ancestors, we thought Outpost 7 had been destroyed." "It was," Daniel said grimly. "Along with most of the other outposts, I'd guess." "How many Krivak ships?" 800, the soldier replied. "Maybe more. Admiral Reeves wants to see you immediately. And—" he looked uncertainly at Nera. "Who is this?" "The reason we might actually have a chance," Daniel said. "Take us to the Admiral." Admiral Sarah Reeves was a woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a military cut, her uniform bearing the scars of recent combat. She stood in the Central Command Center, a circular chamber with holographic displays, showing the progress of the battle in real time. Human losses were mounting, but they were fighting with a desperation born of 3,000 years of preparation. "Dr. Marcus," she said, without turning around, "I suppose you're here to tell me that the long concealment is over." "Yes, ma'am. But that might not be entirely bad news." He gestured to Nera. "Admiral, this is Nera of the Alari. She possesses information about a weapon that could change everything." Reeves turned her eyes, taking in Nera's alien appearance, with only a moment's surprise. "A weapon? What kind of weapon could possibly help us against 800 Krivak ships?" Nera stepped forward, raising her staff. The ancestral spirits whispered to her, filling her mind with images and knowledge she hadn't fully understood before. "The Harmony Spear, an ancient artifact created by the First Alliance to bring peace to the galaxy. My staff is reacting to something here, something in your archives." The Admiral's eyes widened. "The Harmony Spear is real. We have legends about it, stories from before the long concealment. But our archaeologists always thought—" The Alari keep the old knowledge, Nera said. And this staff has been guiding me since I found your outpost. It's trying to lead me somewhere. Reeves nodded to an aide, who quickly brought up archaeological records on the main display. Site after site flashed past each one, showing similar architectural patterns, similar energy signatures. And then, they found a site on the edge of the system, a place that had been marked as interesting, but never fully explored. There, Nera breathed, pointing at the display. That's where it is. The staff is practically singing. Admiral Reeves looked up at the tactical display showing the space battle raging above them. A quarter of the human fleet was already gone, and the Krivak were pressing their advantage. Dr. Marcus, can the Pathfinder reach that site? In the middle of the largest space battle in human history, against 800 Krivak ships. Daniel grinned the expression, somehow both terrified and exhilarated. Of course I can. They launched again minutes later. The Pathfinder's stealth systems pushed to their absolute limit as Daniel navigated through the chaos of combat. The human fleet had formed a defensive sphere around New Terra, their ships fighting desperately to prevent the Krivak from reaching orbital bombardment range. But it was a losing battle. The aliens had too many ships, too much firepower. The archaeological site was on a small moon at the edge of the system, a place that showed obvious signs of ancient construction. As they approached, Nera's staff began glowing so brightly that it was almost painful to look at directly. There's a structure under the surface, Daniel reported, studying his sensors. And it's giving off energy readings like nothing I've ever seen. They landed near what appeared to be nothing more than scattered ruins, but as Nera approached with her staff, hidden doors began opening in the ground. The staff's power was interacting with systems that had lain dormant for millennia, ancient technology, responding to the call of its creators. The chamber they found beneath the surface defied easy description. It was vast, easily the size of a cathedral, its walls covered in flowing scripts from dozens of different species. At the center, on a raised dais, stood a pillar of some crystalline material that pulsed with the same energy as Nera's staff. The Harmony Spear, she whispered, approaching the pillar slowly. It's not a weapon in the way we think of weapons. It's something else. As her staff made contact with the pillar, knowledge flooded her mind. Images of the first Alliance species from across the galaxy, united in opposition to the Krivak's campaign of extinction. The Harmony Spear hadn't been built to destroy. It had been built to enforce peace, to make violence impossible for those touched by its power. Daniel, she called, her voice filled with wonder. Help me understand this. The technology is beyond anything I've ever seen. Daniel approached his human perspective, complementing her spiritual understanding of the device. Together, they began to comprehend the scope of what they had found. The Harmony Spear could project a field of influence across vast distances, a field that would make it impossible for the Krivak to maintain their aggressive mental patterns. It won't hurt them, Nera explained, as they worked to activate the device. It will just change them, force them to see other species as something other than threats to be eliminated. After 3,000 years of hiding, we're about to win this war by making our enemies peaceful. Daniel shook his head in amazement. There's some poetic justice in that. The activation process required both of their skills, Daniel's understanding of technology and Nera's spiritual connection to the ancient power systems. As they worked together, their hands often touching, as they manipulated controls and focused energy, the bond between them deepened. Here at the end of everything they had found, not just salvation for their peoples, but something personal and precious. Above them, the space battle raged on. The human fleet was down to less than half strength, and Krivak forces were beginning to break through to New Terra's atmosphere. Time was running out. Ready, Daniel announced, his hand poised over the final activation control. Nera placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. Together. They activated the Harmony Spear together, and the effect was immediate. A wave of energy radiated outward from the moon, expanding at near light speed to wash over the Krivak fleet. On the Pathfinder's screens, they watched as first one Krivak ship, then another began powering down its weapons. The change rippled through the fleet like a stone dropped in still water. Ships that had been firing on human positions suddenly stopped. Krivak commanders found themselves unable to maintain the aggressive mental patterns that had driven their species for millennia. Weapons powered down shields deactivated, and for the first time in recorded history, a Krivak fleet simply stopped fighting. The silence that followed was deafening. On every ship, human and Krivak alike, crews stared at their sensors in disbelief. The war that had raged for 3,000 years had ended, not with destruction, but with a simple cessation of hostility. Admiral Reeves's voice crackled through the Pathfinder's communication system, filled with wonder and disbelief. "Dr. Marcus, what have you done? The Krivak fleet is... They're trying to communicate. They want to talk." Over the following days, as human and Krivak delegations met for the first time in millennia, Nera and Daniel found themselves at the center of a new age. The Harmony Spear had done more than end the war. It had opened the possibility of true peace between species that had seen each other only as enemy and prey. But for all the grand implications of what they had accomplished, Nera found herself most interested in the smaller, more personal changes. Daniel had asked her to stay on New Terra to help build the new alliance that was already forming between humans, the surviving Alari, and even the Krivak themselves. Standing together on a balcony overlooking the capital city, watching as Krivak and human ships docked side by side for the first time in history, Nera felt a peace she had never expected to find. "So what happens now?" she asked, leaning against Daniel's shoulder. "Now we rebuild," he said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Now we show the galaxy what's possible when species work together instead of fighting." Nera smiled, feeling her staff pulse gently with contentment. The ancestral spirits were at peace, their long vigil finally ended. The war was over, but the real work, the work of building something better, was just beginning. "I never thought I'd say this," Daniel continued, "but I'm glad that Sandstorm drove you into our outpost." "Best storm of my life," Nera agreed, watching as the first joint human Krivak patrol took off from the city's spaceport. "Definitely the best storm of my life." The galaxy had changed forever, but for Nera and Daniel, the greatest discovery hadn't been the Harmony Spear or the survival of humanity. It had been finding each other and learning that love could bridge any gap between species, between worlds, between what was and what could be. The stars above them shone with new promise, and together they would help ensure that promise became reality.